They thought we were fragile. That was their first mistake. For centuries, alien empires studied humanity from afar. To them, we were a primitive species clinging to a fragile blue planet, fighting petty wars, wasting resources divided by politics, language, and culture. They saw weakness in our constant conflict, in our scars of history, in the fragility of our short lives. And they laughed. To the mighty empires of the galaxy, humans were insignificant, barely a footnote in the grand ledger of civilized species. When the day finally came that they revealed themselves, they expected awe. They expected submission. They expected fear. Instead, what they found was resistance. The invasion began at dawn over the skies of New London. Their ships, vast as cities, blocked out the sun, casting shadows over the waking metropolis. Civilians froze in streets as engines roared like gods descending. Alien voices, translated through crude broadcasts, demanded surrender. They spoke of peace through obedience, of salvation through submission. But the message carried an arrogance as old as empires. You are weak. You cannot fight us. You will kneel. And then humanity answered, not with words but with fire. Missiles streaked upward from hidden launch sites. Anti-air batteries, old and nearly forgotten, roared to life. Fighter jets scrambled into the sky, hopelessly outmatched but unwilling to yield. On the ground, soldiers assembled, not with the confidence of victors, but with the grim determination of people who had no other choice but to fight. The aliens were shocked. They expected a planet of frightened civilians waving white flags. Instead, they met soldiers who stood in the streets, rifles clutched in shaking hands, hearts beating faster than ever before, but refusing to run. Because here is the truth the galaxy never understood. Humanity's weakness is its strength. Yes, we bleed. Yes, we break. Yes, our lives are short. But when you take everything from us, when you press us into the dirt and demand obedience, we do not kneel. We fight. The first battles were massacres. Entire divisions were vaporized by weapons beyond comprehension. Tanks crumbled under energy blasts. Cities burned. And yet, through the flames and smoke, humanity's soldiers kept standing. They fought with desperation, with fury, with a kind of madness that the invaders could not comprehend. One story spread faster than the firestorms. A squad of infantry in Berlin held a single bridge against 3 alien walkers for hours, armed with nothing but rifles and grenades. They knew they could not win. They knew no reinforcements would come, but they refused to give ground. When the last soldier fell, his body riddled with burns and plasma wounds, the aliens discovered he had rigged explosives under the bridge. He destroyed the structure and himself, just to deny them a crossing. That was the first time the invaders hesitated. Alien commanders called humans reckless, irrational. They could not understand why soldiers would fight when defeat was certain, why they would throw away their fragile lives so willingly. To them, survival was logic, surrender was rationality, obedience was safety. But humans broke all logic. They would rather burn alive than bow. The galaxy had always mistaken compassion for weakness, empathy for fragility, mortality for insignificance. But what they failed to see was that those very traits forged us into something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Every soldier who fell inspired 10 more to rise. Every city that burned became a rallying cry. Every defeat was carved into memory as fuel for the fire. Humanity's soldiers were not fighting for conquest or empire or glory. They were fighting for each other, for their families, their homes, their very right to exist. And there is no weapon in the galaxy more terrifying than a soldier with nothing left to lose. The aliens thought humans would break, but instead they began to learn fear. Fear of the species that refused to die. Fear of soldiers who would charge headfirst into plasma fire. Fear of warriors who screamed defiance even as their bodies burned. Fear of a humanity that turned weakness into fury. It was not the weapons that terrified the galaxy. It was the will, the impossible, unyielding will of human soldiers who would not accept defeat. And so, the story begins, not with conquest, not with surrender, but with a truth the galaxy would never forget. They thought we were weak. Then they met our soldiers. The war should have ended in weeks. That was what the alien strategists believed when they unleashed their fleets upon Earth. Their weapons outmatched ours 100-fold. Their armies had conquered countless species across the galaxy, reducing civilizations to obedient vassals with frightening efficiency. Humanity in their calculations would be no different. A swift strike, a show of overwhelming force, and then silence. But what the invaders had not accounted for was the madness of human resistance. Every city became a battlefield. Every street turned into a fortress. Soldiers and civilians alike joined forces in ways that confounded the aliens' predictive models. Where other species had collapsed under the weight of orbital bombardments, humanity adapted. Where others surrendered after their leaders were executed, humanity's resolve only hardened. When one general fell, another stepped forward. When one capital was reduced to ash, the survivors carried their banners into the next fight. Alien intelligence reported the same phenomenon over and over. Humans did not stop. In the jungles of South America, squads of special forces melted into dense foliage, striking at enemy patrols with guerrilla tactics. They used the terrain like a weapon, turning forests into death traps, rivers into ambush zones. Entire battalions of invaders disappeared, never returning to their dropships. In the deserts of Africa, human fighters used the blistering sun and shifting sands as cover, launching raids that crippled supply lines. In icy tundras, soldiers endured freezing storms just to sabotage enemy bases, and through it all, a terrifying realization began to creep into the alien command structure. Humans were not just fighting, they were learning. Captured alien weapons were disassembled and studied within days. Reverse-engineered prototypes, crude at first, became deadlier with every passing week. Soldiers adapted tactics on the fly, mixing modern warfare with ancient strategies long forgotten by the galaxy. A spear might not pierce alien armor, but a spear tipped with scavenged plasma shards, hurled from the shadows of a ruined cathedral, could drop a soldier where he stood. One incident above all shook the invaders to their core. In the ruins of Shanghai, a single battalion of human infantry was cornered by overwhelming alien forces. Surrounded and cut off, they were ordered to hold for as long as possible, while civilians evacuated through underground tunnels. For 3 days and nights they fought without rest. Ammunition dwindled, rations vanished, and still they stood their ground. On the 4th day, when the aliens finally overran the city block, they found the bodies of every last human soldier piled in defensive positions, rifles still clutched in lifeless hands. Around them lay wreckage of alien walkers and tanks, destroyed not by advanced weapons, but by sheer human ingenuity. Homemade explosives, collapsing buildings, traps built from twisted metal and debris. The battalion was gone, but they had taken an entire division with them. That story spread across the alien fleets like wildfire, and for the first time, soldiers of the invaders hesitated before engaging humans in close combat. They had been trained to see humanity as weak, fragile, inferior, yet time and again their enemies proved stronger than logic, fiercer than reason, and far deadlier than their fragile forms suggested. Alien officers began to record strange battlefield reports. Human soldiers fighting while on fire. Humans refusing medical treatment so others could live. A soldier dragging himself with shattered legs across the ground, still firing until his last breath. These were not isolated incidents. They were patterns the alien commanders could not understand. For them, war was a tool of control, calculated and precise. But for humans, war was survival, and survival unleashed something far darker, far more primal. Humanity's soldiers carried the weight of extinction on their shoulders. To them, every battle was not just another conflict. It was a last stand for the species itself. What frightened the invaders most was not humanity's weapons, but their unpredictability. Other species had fought with honor, with calculation, with logic. But humans fought with desperation, with fury, with creativity born of madness. They were willing to use anything as a weapon, fire, glass, even their own blood. If it meant buying one more second for their comrades, they would pay the price. In council chambers aboard the alien command ships, debates raged. Some argued that humanity should be eradicated at once, their planet scoured from orbit, their survivors hunted to extinction. Others argued that perhaps humans could still be broken, forced into obedience like so many before them. But every battle seemed to contradict that belief. The more they fought humans, the more they realized breaking them was impossible, because humanity did not view death as defeat. For them, death was fuel. Every soldier who fell only ignited the will of those who survived. Every scar, every loss, every failure was not a chain to drag them down, but a hammer striking steel, forging something unbreakable. And so, the legend of human soldiers began to spread, not just among their enemies, but among the enslaved species of the galaxy. For the first time in centuries, whispers of hope stirred. If humans could fight back against the great empire, perhaps others could too. The invaders had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest. Instead, they had awakened a nightmare because they thought humans were weak. But the truth was dawning across every battlefield, in every blood-soaked trench and burning city. Humans were soldiers, and they were only just beginning to fight. The aliens had come to Earth believing their technology would guarantee victory. Plasma cannons, energy shields, and war machines the size of skyscrapers, these were the tools they wielded to terrify lesser species into submission. Against such overwhelming force, no planet had ever stood a chance. Until now, humanity's armies should have been crushed. Instead, the war entered a new phase, one that baffled and horrified the alien strategists. Humanity did not just endure the invaders' weapons, they adapted to them. Every captured gun, every broken walker, every wrecked fighter was scavenged and dissected by human engineers. What the invaders had thought of as scraps of useless wreckage became the building blocks of terrifying innovation. Within months, human soldiers carried rifles built from alien components. Tanks rolled across battlefields retrofitted with plasma shielding. Old fighter jets, once outdated relics, soared through the skies armed with reverse-engineered alien missiles. It was not perfect. It was not elegant, but it worked. And with every new weapon, humanity's soldiers grew more dangerous. One battle in the mountains of Central Asia became infamous. A regiment of alien armored vehicles advanced through a valley, confident that their energy shields made them invincible. But human soldiers had studied the shields. They discovered that if they struck at precise intervals with explosives and concentrated fire, the shields could be destabilized for mere seconds. That was enough. The ambush began with avalanche charges, detonating snow and rock to crush the vanguard. Then came swarms of infantry, hurling grenades and firing weapons in perfect synchronization. The shields flickered, collapsed, and suddenly the invincible machines were nothing more than metal husks waiting to burn. The valley was littered with alien wreckage by nightfall, and the few survivors whispered a chilling truth to their commanders. The humans were learning faster than anyone had thought possible. But it was not just weapons that made humanity terrifying. It was their tactics, the creativity, the unpredictability, the madness. In the ruins of Paris, alien forces established a fortified command center, certain no human could breach it. The defenders were correct. No ordinary army could. But humans were not ordinary. At night, squads of soldiers tunneled beneath the ruins, digging silently through rubble and sewer systems. When dawn broke, explosions tore the fortress from below, and soldiers surged out of the ground like demons rising from the depths. The aliens never saw it coming. In the Pacific, alien fleets attempted to blockade supply routes, believing starvation would break Earth's defenses. Instead, human submarines, ancient, obsolete but silent, slipped beneath the blockade. They struck with torpedoes modified with stolen plasma charges, shattering cruisers that should have been untouchable. The oceans, once thought safe for the invaders, became killing grounds. But the most infamous tale came from the streets of New York. Surrounded on all sides, cut off from supplies, the city was declared lost by alien commanders. Yet for weeks, human soldiers and civilians waged a guerrilla campaign that made every block a battlefield. Snipers haunted rooftops, booby traps laced every alley, fires burned through the night, hiding movement and spreading chaos. And then, one night, the skyline lit up, not with alien bombardments but with human sabotage. Dozens of alien ships resting on captured landing zones exploded in unison, their fuel igniting the skies in a chain reaction that destroyed half the occupying force. When alien reinforcements arrived, the humans were gone, vanished into tunnels, sewers, and safe houses. New York was a graveyard for the invaders, a wound they never forgot. By now, the galaxy had taken notice. Reports of the war on Earth spread beyond the Federation's censorship. Enslaved species who had long given up hope listened with wide eyes as whispers of human defiance reached their ears. They heard of soldiers who fought without fear, who weaponized their own mortality, who turned every street, every mountain, every ocean into a battlefield. And a question began to grow. If humans could resist, why could not they? The Federation grew desperate. They escalated their tactics, unleashing weapons of mass destruction, leveling entire cities in an attempt to crush morale. But instead of breaking, humanity grew more determined. Every atrocity became a rallying cry, every mass grave a promise of vengeance. Soldiers painted the names of fallen families on their armor, carrying their memory into battle. For the invaders, the psychological toll was devastating. They had always ruled through fear, but their greatest weapon had no effect on humanity. In fact, the more they tried to terrify humans, the more humans seemed to grow stronger. It was as though the species thrived on the edge of annihilation. One alien commander before his death recorded a final message to his superiors. His words were later discovered by human intelligence, and they spread across the war like wildfire. They are not fighting to win. They are fighting to deny us victory. Every soldier is willing to die, not for glory, not for empire, but simply to make us pay. I do not understand them. I do not think I ever will. But I know this. If we continue this war, it will not be humanity that dies. It will be us. The Federation had believed humans were weak. But now, faced with soldiers who turned their fragility into fury, their short lives into weapons, they realized they had made a mistake. Because humanity's greatest strength was not in its machines, its weapons, or its technology. It was in its soldiers, men and women who, when the galaxy expected surrender, chose instead to fight like demons. And the galaxy was only beginning to understand what that meant. The galaxy had always been ruled by empires that thrived on intimidation. Fear was the universal currency. To make a species submit, you did not need to kill them all. You only needed to convince them that resistance was hopeless. And for countless ages that strategy had worked, until they came to Earth. The stories of human soldiers spread like wildfire beyond the Federation's control. Smuggled transmissions, intercepted signals, and desperate cries from the front lines carried tales of defiance that no censorship could suppress. Across enslaved worlds, whispers began. The humans are fighting back, and winning. At first, those whispers were met with disbelief. How could a fragile young species succeed where ancient civilizations had failed? But the evidence was undeniable. Footage of battles circulated through hidden channels. Soldiers dragging themselves through smoke with shattered bodies, still firing. Platoons charging alien war machines with nothing but salvaged rifles and improvised bombs. Entire units laughing in the face of certain death as they brought down enemies 10 times their size. What truly terrified the galaxy, however, was not the battles themselves, but the psychology behind them. Humans did not simply fight. They fought with an intensity that bordered on madness, with a disregard for self-preservation that shattered the alien understanding of war. Where most species fought to survive, humans fought to deny defeat. Even in loss they found victory. Take the siege of Santiago. Surrounded by overwhelming forces, human defenders lasted far beyond projections. When ammunition ran out, they fought with blades. When blades broke, they fought with fists. When they were finally overwhelmed, the city was a wasteland of collapsed buildings and wreckage that took months for the invaders to secure. The aliens gained nothing but ash. The soldiers were dead, but their defiance became legend. Or consider the Battle of Nairobi, where an entire regiment volunteered for what was effectively suicide. Holding a choke point against advancing alien armor, they knew reinforcements would not arrive. They knew their chances were zero, and yet they held. For every human who fell, an alien tank went with them. When the dust cleared, the regiment was gone, but so was the enemy's advance. It was not victory in the traditional sense, but it changed the course of the war. Such moments transformed human soldiers into legends. They were no longer seen as mere combatants, but as symbols, beacons of defiance that burned brighter with every sacrifice. Soldiers painted skulls on their helmets, not to frighten enemies, but to remind themselves that death was inevitable and meaningless compared to freedom. Others carved the names of fallen comrades into their rifles, carrying memory as a weapon. The Federation soldiers, once arrogant, began to tremble at the prospect of facing humans. Reports of desertions increased. Some units refused to deploy on Earth at all, terrified of what they called the demons in flesh. Even the strongest war machines hesitated when their crews saw a swarm of humans charging without hesitation, eyes blazing with fury, and the fear spread further. For the first time in living memory, enslaved species began to resist. Inspired by humanity, uprisings broke out on occupied worlds. Secret militias trained in forests, deserts, and mountains, whispering that if humans could stand against the Empire, so could they. Alien soldiers tasked with quelling rebellion now faced resistance fueled by human legend. The Federation's leaders grew desperate. Their empire was not built to withstand resistance, it was built to crush it instantly. The longer the war dragged on, the weaker their grip became. They had never intended to fight an enemy like humanity, one that viewed death not as defeat, but as fuel. Alien propaganda tried to paint humans as monsters, irrational, suicidal, dangerous to themselves and others. Ironically, that propaganda only made the legends more powerful. If humans were monsters, then they were monsters the galaxy desperately needed. Monsters that did not bow, monsters that would rather burn than surrender. There was another factor the invaders had never accounted for: humanity's unity in the face of extinction. For all our history of conflict, war, and division, the invasion did something no empire had achieved before. It united humanity under a single cause. Soldiers from every nation fought side by side. Language barriers crumbled on the battlefield, replaced by the unspoken understanding of survival. Enemies of yesterday became brothers and sisters in arms. In one infamous battle in the ruins of Moscow, soldiers from rival nations, men and women who once saw each other as enemies, died shoulder to shoulder defending a single bunker. That image, captured by a hidden camera and broadcast across the resistance, became a symbol of humanity's transformation. Where the galaxy had seen weakness in our division, the invasion forged strength in unity, and so the invaders began to lose ground. Slowly at first, skirmishes, raids, isolated victories. Then entire battles. Human soldiers learned to exploit every weakness, to turn every terrain into a weapon. They built traps in forests, death corridors in cities, minefields in deserts. No battlefield was ever safe for the invaders. The Federation, once laughing at humanity's weakness, now faced the unthinkable: retreat. Their commanders argued, their fleets hesitated, and their soldiers grew fearful. Because every day the war dragged on, humanity grew stronger. The galaxy had seen countless wars, countless empires rise and fall, but never before had it seen a species so fragile, so mortal, fight with such ferocity. And the terrifying truth was now undeniable. The soldiers of Earth were not just defending their world, they were teaching the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. They had been underestimated, mocked, dismissed as weak. But in the end, when the soldiers of humanity stood unbroken amid the ashes, the galaxy finally understood. Weakness had been a mask. Underneath it, humanity was a weapon sharper than any blade, fiercer than any beast, and more terrifying than any empire could imagine. The war had shifted. For the first time since the invasion began, humanity was no longer merely surviving. We were advancing. What had started as scattered resistance was now organized campaigns. The Federation's fleets, once symbols of dominance, found themselves hunted by ragtag human squadrons that struck with surgical precision, disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. The world had changed. Cities once reduced to rubble became fortresses. Underground tunnels spanned for miles, filled with workshops producing weapons from scavenged alien tech. Every village, every mountain range, every forest became a potential stronghold. The Earth itself seemed to fight alongside humanity. Human soldiers became predators. They learned how to exploit the enemy's reliance on advanced technology. Electromagnetic pulses disabled their machines. Camouflage traps destroyed armored walkers. Guerrilla fighters ambushed convoys in dense terrain. Where the aliens relied on control, humans thrived in chaos. And chaos was the one thing the Federation could not master. But the true terror was psychological. The Federation's military had been trained on the assumption that enemies valued life above all else. That if you showed overwhelming force, they would surrender. Humans shattered that logic. They had faced soldiers who, even engulfed in flames, continued to advance. They had seen prisoners throw themselves onto enemy weapons just to give comrades a chance to escape. They had watched entire platoons charge against impossible odds, not for victory, but to buy time. The aliens could not comprehend it. To them, such behavior was insanity. To humans, it was survival. And more than survival, it was defiance. The story of Captain Elias became one of the most feared tales whispered in alien barracks. Surrounded by superior forces, his unit refused to retreat. When their bunker was finally breached, Elias led his last surviving soldiers in a hand-to-hand brawl against towering alien warriors. They fought until their last breath, killing far beyond what statistics deemed possible. When the Federation examined the battlefield afterward, they found walls painted with scorch marks, pools of blood, and human hands still clutching alien throats in death. That story spread faster than the Federation could contain it. To the invaders, it was a nightmare. To humanity, it was a rallying cry. Fight until nothing is left. Alien commanders convened emergency councils. Their fleets grew hesitant. Their soldiers whispered about the cursed ones of Earth. Discipline eroded. Fear spread. What had begun as arrogance turned into paranoia. Soldiers jumped at shadows. Entire battalions refused to march into cities known to be defended by human troops, and humanity used that fear like a blade. Human generals, once outmatched, learned to weaponize reputation. They deliberately spread exaggerated stories of soldiers who fought with broken bones, of men and women who laughed at the face of death. The more the Federation tried to suppress these tales, the stronger they became. In one legendary campaign, a single human platoon was tasked with defending a pass against thousands of alien troops. They lasted only hours before being overrun, but the propaganda machine spun the story into a saga. 30 stood against 3,000. The number grew with every retelling. Soon, Federation soldiers truly believed humans could not be defeated without catastrophic losses. Fear did the rest. The galaxy was watching too. Across enslaved worlds, whispers grew louder. Resistance cells grew bolder. They adopted human tactics, human defiance, and even human symbols: skulls, clenched fists, banners painted with the word freedom. In every rebellion, humanity was the inspiration. The Federation had wanted to make Earth an example of weakness. Instead, it had made Earth an example of rebellion. The invaders' rulers, accustomed to domination, could not comprehend how quickly control slipped through their fingers. They had seen countless species break under less pressure. But humanity was different. Humanity did not just resist, they infected others with resistance and the alien. Leaders realized the truth too late. The war was no longer about Earth, it was about the galaxy. Human soldiers were no longer defending their homeworld, they were spearheading a revolution. Federation. Reports described it with dread. Their soldiers fight like they have nothing to lose. But in truth, humans fought because they had everything to lose. Their families, their children, their planet. They were willing to gamble their lives because the alternative was slavery. That was a logic the Empire had never faced. The greatest turning point came in the battle above Titan. Human fleets, patched together with salvaged alien tech, faced a Federation armada. The odds were absurd, yet the humans charged. Pilots overloaded engines, driving ships into enemy formations, sacrificing themselves to tear holes in enemy lines. Others pushed their craft beyond safe limits, burning themselves alive inside cockpits to score one more kill. When the smoke cleared, Titan was a graveyard of ships. And though humanity's losses were devastating, the Federation had been forced to retreat. For the first time, an alien armada fled in terror from a species it had once mocked. That retreat sent shockwaves across the galaxy. Entire star systems erupted in rebellion. Alien soldiers mutinied, refusing to fight the Death Walkers of Earth. Human soldiers had changed the galaxy not just through battle, but through fear. The irony was undeniable. The Federation had laughed at humanity. They had called us weak, fragile, insignificant. But now their fleets trembled at the thought of facing human soldiers. Their empire was unraveling because of the very species they had sought to enslave. And through it all, humanity learned something about itself. We had always feared our own violence, our own history of war. But against an empire that thrived on domination, those same qualities became our salvation. The galaxy had thought humans were weak, but in the crucible of war, they learned the truth. We were not weak. We were monsters of resilience, born of struggle, sharpened by history, and forged by fire, and no empire in the galaxy could withstand us. The Federation's empire had lasted for millennia. It had crushed rebellions, enslaved entire civilizations, and consumed countless worlds. But it had never faced soldiers like ours, soldiers who fought not for conquest, but for survival. Soldiers who turned pain into power, who transformed every defeat into fuel for the next battle. By the final year of the war, the invaders' fleets were fractured. Supply lines collapsed under constant ambushes. Colonies they had once ruled through fear now openly defied them, emboldened by whispers of human defiance. Everywhere the same stories echoed. Humans who refused to kneel, soldiers who kept fighting long after death should have claimed them. The Federation tried to erase those stories. They labeled them propaganda, lies, exaggerations. But their own troops knew the truth. They had seen it with their own eyes. They had watched comrades torn apart by human grenades hurled from burning hands. They had fought soldiers who, even while bleeding out, dragged themselves forward to pull the pin on one last explosive. They had learned to fear the human stare, the eyes that looked at death not with dread, but with grim acceptance. And when fear infects an army, it spreads faster than any weapon. The breaking point came at Outpost Vega. It was meant to be a final show of Federation power. The strongest fortress outside of their capital systems. Shields impenetrable, garrisons endless, weapons forged from technologies beyond comprehension. Humanity should have had no chance. But the soldiers who arrived at Vega were not the desperate defenders of Earth anymore. They were veterans of hell, sharpened by every nightmare the invaders had thrown at them. They came not to survive, but to end the war. The assault lasted days. Entire battalions burned under plasma fire. Ships rained from the sky like falling stars. But humanity did not stop. They advanced through firestorms, through collapsed trenches, through battlefields so soaked in blood that the ground turned black. They fought with a fury that no strategy could contain. When the shields of Vega finally fell, the Federation soldiers inside broke. Some surrendered, others fled, and many simply froze, unable to face the humans pouring through the breach. The once proud empire had been reduced to terrified troops who no longer believed in their own strength. And then it happened, the moment that shattered the Federation forever. The Capital broadcast channel, hijacked by human operatives, spread a single image across the galaxy. A lone human soldier, helmet cracked, armor scorched, standing atop the ruins of Vega's fortress, raising the tattered Earth flag high into the smoky sky. That image became legend. It was no longer just about Earth's survival. It was about the death of tyranny. The galaxy erupted. Colonized species rose in unison. Civilizations that had lived in chains for centuries now fought with human ferocity. They adopted our tactics, our defiance, our refusal to kneel. And for the first time, the Federation faced not one enemy, but many. Humanity had not only saved itself, it had lit a fire that consumed an empire. The war dragged on, but the end was inevitable. Systems fell, fleets crumbled, and the once great Federation fractured into fragments. Humanity, scarred and bloodied, emerged from the ashes victorious. Not because we were the strongest, not because we had the most advanced weapons, but because we were the most relentless. The aliens had laughed at us once. They saw fragile bones, fragile flesh, fragile lives. But what they never understood was that fragility breeds resilience. That mortality gives life meaning. That weakness, when embraced, becomes the seed of unstoppable strength. Human soldiers taught the galaxy a truth it will never forget. We are not the strongest species, nor the most advanced. But we are the ones who rise when we are beaten down. We are the ones who fight when surrender would be easier. We are the ones who turn fear into fire. And that is why we survive. When the last embers of the Federation faded into history, alien historians would write of their downfall. Some blamed arrogance, others poor strategy, others the inevitability of rebellion. But there was one line written in every record, one phrase whispered in every alien academy, one truth no species could deny. They thought humans were weak. Then they met our soldiers, and the galaxy would never laugh again.